The season, it is so close. We can taste it, but talking season isn't quite over yet. And today we got our biggest off-season talking point with the first look at the preseason AP Top 25 poll. If you're like us and you're starved for content, I'm sure you've seen this. But let's remind you, you've got Georgia on top for the second straight preseason, Ohio State at 2, Oregon debuting at number 3. That is their best preseason ranking in a very long time. Ole Miss at 6 has its best preseason ranking in a very, very, very long time, since 1970. You see some of these teams down towards the bottom. Missouri up at number 11 after a huge season last year. Tennessee 15, Clemson 14. That is your look at the preseason AP Top 25 poll. So we always preach on this show that recruiting rankings are predictors for future success. So we actually averaged the last 3 recruiting classes and compared them to the AP Top 25 poll to see if they actually were predictors. And we're going to go ahead and show you, Blair, the top 5, because it sure seems like it is, because everybody in that top 5 was in the top 8 over the last 3 years of recruiting rankings. You see the lowest average there is Oregon at 8, but they're coming off a cycle where they finished 3rd overall. So the Ducks have really just gotten hotter on the trail as of late. Now, Blair, very obviously, this does not include any wins in the portal. We know that's going to factor in to some of these preseason rankings. But looking at these rankings overall, what do you take away from some of these numbers comparing the recruiting classes to the AP Top 25 preseason poll?
It looks like a mirror. It looks like we're looking at a mirror. And I think what's interesting about it is the fact that it's the same schools that we talk about time and time again in some of these high profile heavyweight fights for recruits. And that's because they have a lot to sell. They have a lot of upside in terms of what the program is doing, the trajectory of the program, how much talent is on the team. And even with the expanded field into a 12-team playoff, I think all these teams are able to sell that to recruits and say, hey, come here. We know we're talented. We know we have a lot of depth, but you can be one of the missing pieces. And it kind of just goes to show you that even in the NIL era and in this era of parity, we just talked about Josh Petty committing to Georgia Tech, and we had a 5-star tight end in Lincoln Cure going to Kansas State. Although that's going to happen from time to time in this era, I think still we get to see some of these big time programs, the Blue Bloods, they're still going to be able to fight out for the top elite prospects, and then that translates into what we call the top 25.
All right, so those were just the top 5, but we did this for every single team in the top 25. We're going to point out some of the biggest discrepancies. My eyes immediately go to Ole Miss, who was 6 in the preseason poll, but when it comes to their recruiting rankings over the last 3 years, 24th is their average. Of course, you got to look to the portal as a reason for this, but what stands out to you, Blair?
It's even worse in this current cycle, Emily. They're 33rd in the country for 2025, so they're not essentially getting it done in the high school ranks, but I think all it says is that from a coaching perspective, from a scheme perspective, they're able to plug in those transfers that you talked about, and they understand their deficiencies on the roster. Maybe they take some bigger swings on the recruiting trail and they come up with some bigger misses, but they're able to make that up on the transfer portal. We've obviously seen Lane Kiffin vouch for what he does in the portal and the flips that he's able to do late in the recruiting cycle. But I think they focus on getting it done on Saturdays, developing some of the talent that they have. They recruit really well to their scheme, and from an NFL perspective, they're still really developing players. They've had 13 NFL draft picks over the last 3 years, so they're getting it done not only, but obviously from a projection standpoint, getting guys to the next level as well.
Yeah, that one felt kind of obvious for me is in terms of why Ole Miss is outperforming its average recruiting rankings. Just you see the wins, former 5-stars that they're bringing in the transfer portal. But this next one, the biggest discrepancy we saw, I'm curious on your opinion of Kansas, because they are ranked 22nd in the preseason poll, but their average recruiting rankings over the last 3 years, 78th. Why do you think that is?
I think they're just comfortable in who they are. They recruit to a system. I don't think they get caught up in too many high profile recruiting battles. So there's no real wasted energy. They did get a top 100 player last year in Deshaun Warner, but he was the only one in that 2024 cycle. And he's expected to contribute as a true freshman off the edge there with really electric speed and his pursuit ability. But I think this is a program that just recruits to what they do and they recruit to their system. And maybe they're able to find some hidden gems and find players that they can develop. And I don't think they're looking for instant impact players. I mentioned Deshaun Warner. He's in the minority in that sense. They're going to get a player in the program and really invest in him and in them and those players to be able to eventually help out that roster. So right now, they're outside the top 50 as well when you look at it from the 2024 rankings. So even though they are a top 25 team on the field, according to the media, it's not really translating in a recruiting sense because they're not really even trying to push for that. I think they just want to get the best type of players that will fit what they want to do.
Before we move on to the next one, I do need to follow up on that. I love the way that you phrased it and that they recognize who they are and they don't waste their time getting into these recruiting battles. I feel like people shy away from saying that because you want everybody to believe that they're the big dog and they can be in it for these top high-profile guys, but wasting their time. I love the way that you phrase that. How frequently do you see programs maybe get into battles that perhaps are a waste of time and need to be more self-aware?
You see it a lot actually in the group of five space or even in that low power four phase because I think these coaches understand that they only have a certain amount of time to be able to recruit and the energy that it takes to travel and go out and evaluate and scout players. Maybe once you start to recognize that you're lower on in the offer sheet, right, where you're maybe competing against some of the programs that we rambled off the top, the Ohio States, the Texas, the Oregons, the Georgias, the Alabamas. If you've offered a player that they are also in on, it's probably not going to go your way. So just I guess cut it off before it gets even deeper, and then you start to figure out, okay, what's our next plan of attack? Who are some players that we can move towards? I think Kansas and a number of other programs are doing a terrific job of that, and then I think it translates because they're able to spend more time building up their program, scheming. I think focusing on their own team, recruiting their own team to stay on board. I think all of that kind of comes into play when you think about eliminating maybe some wasted energy on the recruiting trail.
Coaching certainly a factor too for Kansas in terms of outperforming those recruiting rankings. Now there's some underperforming teams we want to highlight. First one being Oklahoma. Their average class ranking is in the top 10 at number 7, which is very high, yet they land at 16 in the preseason AP poll. What do you think the cause is for this difference?
I just don't know if the media believes in what they're going to be able to do in the SEC. While Texas made that big jump and they reached the playoff last year, and I think there's a lot of optimism among the media and the national folk to be able to see the Longhorns have success in the new conference. Maybe the hill will be a little steeper for Oklahoma. The recruiting rankings don't say that, though, so that could be a really sneaky option for a potential playoff run there. Brent Venables has done it before. He's been obviously really effective at Clemson, and he's building up that defensive front at Oklahoma. I think that's one of those teams that you look at and you're like, okay, maybe they are going to be able to turn things around maybe quicker than maybe other people expect them to. The schedule's not an easy one. It's a ramp up in competition, but they have the talent. They've been able to accumulate a lot of star power on that team. So, maybe I think there's a little bit of give and take there where people are like, okay, we're going to give Texas the benefit of the doubt heading into the new conference. Maybe we should pump the brakes a little bit on Oklahoma.
Speaking of the state of Texas, that is where our next underperformer is, and that is Texas A&M. They come in with a recruiting ranking average of 12 over the last 3 years, but in the preseason poll, landing at 20. Now, it is very easy to put a lot of the blame towards the guy that you're looking at right now. Not blaming him, but blame for underperforming and the fact that they have a new head coach. But what do you think?
I do think that this is an underperforming because they're in a rebuild mode. I think everyone would recognize that. Maybe the players on the team don't want to say that, or the coaches won't admit that. But I think everyone understands that A&M has some work to do to really add talent and playable talent. They have a lot of star power, but they just haven't been able to develop some of those players that they were able to land in recent cycles. They do have plenty of buzz on the recruiting trail currently. They're number 7 nationally in the 2025 class rankings. So this is a program that I think is selling the future. Mike Elko is selling opportunity to come in and make an impact. They have a new offensive coordinator in Colin Klein, so I think everyone's kind of excited and antsy to see what that offense is going to look like, because they do have plenty of weapons. They have a lot of defensive talent as well. Elko's obviously been in College Station before, and what he was able to do at Duke was obviously impressive as well. So this is another one of those wait and see approach moments for the media. I think looking at A&M, you like what they have. You just want to see what kind of steps they're going to be able to take forward.
And once again, this is a preseason poll. We're not going to tell you all the stats here. I'm sure you can figure it out, but it's not necessarily an indicator of the actual season success that they have. But once again, it's something for us to talk about this time of year, and we will eat it up. Thank you so much, Blair. You can check out more of his work and our whole crew at 247sports.com. That is the place to be for all things college football and recruiting. Also, of course, college basketball. Check out our excellent team of writers and insiders at 247sports.com.